Hello, everybody, and welcome to podcast number 81 of the Gordon and Charisse Show. And honey, I will have to say that we're on a roll. Like this last podcast and now this podcast, these are costly podcasts, wouldn't you say?
In more than one way, and you've still maintained your tan.
I know, so have you.
Okay.
Oh man, I wish we always could.
Not much has changed since the last podcast.
No, not much, but you know, it may not stay for too long. We're still in a Colorado cold season.
Yes, we are. But it's nice to have two homes.
Yep.
And it's nice to get refreshed in both places. Mm-hmm. And more importantly, it's nice to put our eyes on God and allow our lives to be a contribution for others. And
we've thought so much about the Better Living community, haven't we?
Very much so.
And I think you've got this stirring inside of you. It's fun to watch it from here because it's just like something is starting to brew inside of you. This Dr. Selly, you're not just a physical doctor anymore. I know you're no longer practicing, but there's a spiritual doctor side of you. And I love it when that part comes out of you because it's so beautiful and the world needs it. And and sometimes the words that you choose to say are not always easy. Even for me.
Okay, honey. What words are you referring to?
Well, because they get very direct, or they're punchy, or they require like some thought of going, oh, this is uncomfortable for a minute. And I realize, you know what? I'm kind of stuck there. That's why it's uncomfortable.
Right.
And so
change is hard.
And darn it, it is hard.
It's hard.
I will say for me, change has always represented trauma. And to be able to change outside of a trauma mindset, outside of saying I'm changing because this has been forced upon me and my life is going to be, a part of my life is taken away, or something really bad is happening to create this change. Well, certainly pain can do that in our lives, of course. But there's a change that doesn't have to be so traumatic.
But it's hard when we get stuck.
No doubt. So let me just say that.
Sometimes my words are coach-like, disciple-like. It's more of it's time to get up and pick up your mat and walk now.
Instead of me slapping you with my mat?
Well, I just don't want people still staying in the pool of Bethesda, just floating around, when now is the time. There are so many people that need to make change now.
That's right.
If their health is stable enough, they need to make those changes now. So sometimes the words, I don't think they're very forceful. I just want them to be inspiring, okay? And I want to share the depths of what we know empirically, as well as intellectually, as well as spiritually, the different phases that it takes to build up this new life that you have.
And this particular podcast is called The Cost of Our Calling.
And there is a cost to our calling. Very much so. Very much so. So go ahead and get us started for today.
You've brought this up, but it's something that I definitely think about. It's something that I think we need to define or elaborate on, that sometimes we think that work is the same thing as our purpose, right?
Many times.
And so sometimes we've worked in the past, or we're working in some capacity of our life, or doing something entrepreneurial. But I would say that is work always our purpose? And sometimes our purpose leads us into work, I believe. But I think that there's a cost to committing to something, and work can also bury us from our true self.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
And sometimes work can be a distraction from our true purpose. So it's finding that purpose, and finding it in maybe that our identity may not just be in what we do, but it's in who we are, and who we are in God.
Well, let's do this, Cherise. How about you and I right now? Imagine the audience member. We're going to walk into their home. And as we're in the home, and they're sharing their lives, their victories and their defeats that they've had of trying to change, a big part of what they're struggling with is this. The typical things in corporate life, whether it's America or European or another section on the globe, they say, hey, listen, we can't start anew. We don't fit that anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? And we even see that with the healthy population. They're moving into this gig economy as independent contractors, and they're starting new entrepreneurial ventures right now because they can work from home. They don't have to go to the office space. But there's a lot of people right now, what they do typically correlates to their purpose. And there's a lot of people that have been in trauma. And if we're speaking with a couple or a man or a woman in a home right now, and they're going to ask us, what's the cost to our calling? How do we get restarted? And so I would say this, work is very important because if you're doing good works for the Lord, there's rewards that are going to come later in your life. They're going to come in heaven, okay? But there is a cost to having a new identity and reconstructing your life.
And for you, Gordon, your work
Yes.
was taken away from you.
Yes, it was.
And many people can relate to that, whether it's because of health, if it's because of economic situations, if it's because of political issues. I mean, there's so many things that can happen, COVID, where their work, what they once did, was pulled away.
Yes. Yes. And so their whole identity is completely shattered. There's as much pain in that construct as there is dealing with chronic pain.
I believe that.
And it's very difficult to start over. It feels like there has to be a miracle. And a lot of times people are looking for governmental assistance, and I completely understand.
And there's a place for that.
There's a place and there's a time, and I'm not making any judgments on that. Our conversation is with the couple who are saying, how do we start over? What's going on? And I would say this. First, let's define what a committed cost is.
Yeah.
Okay? You and I are walking through these same things even with this platform.
Totally.
Okay? So here's what we define as a committed cost in business or a small business or a large project. Okay? It's this. A committed cost is an investment that a business entity has already made and cannot recover by any means, as well as obligations already made that the business cannot get out of. Now think about that for a few seconds. You're probably going to invest more than you anticipated. And when you make that investment, you're going to go through psychological times of, hey, listen, the little bit that I have to get started again on something, I only see losses involved.
Yeah.
Okay? I see everything being taken away.
You know, I would say that there are times where we have to shrink to multiply, and we've said that before. And there are times where there is a cost to going into a change, and that cost it can be kind of scary looking at your bank account. But if you only look at the loss, if you're only driven by loss, again, you'll never get to the gain.
You won't make the commitment.
Absolutely.
So as we're speaking with these folks in the living room right now, okay, we're wanting to start over, I would say this. The world offers this opinion. Do what the passion is in your life. And I would say this. The passion is on the outside. And And if you're in chronic pain and you're trying to establish your new identity, you're going to get a lot of problems and a lot of roadblocks where the spirit of poverty or impoverishment is going to take over.
Yeah,
okay?
Your pain is on the outside and that thinking is on the outside. And they're doing this.
They're doing this. So here we are in the living room. I would say to the folks this, okay? Look inwardly first. I've had to do that with you at different seasons. Look inwardly.
That's good.
Not outwardly. Breathe, pause, reset, the different things that you have to do. And the good news is this. You've already gone through a dying to self process. So you already understand what a commitment is just to stay alive and survive. But the good news is now you can retarget your thoughts and your motivations towards building something new. And all these things that we're talking about, let's define a committed cost. You can just check that off the list. You're already there. Okay?
So it starts in the inner man.
It starts
the inner woman.
It starts in the inner man. We can't get caught in the trap of having a fixed mindset that's not pliable to how God moves us through faith.
Can you explain that? Like, can you give an illustration?
Well, here's what happened. Reason is impelled to reject the abruptness of the response of God's calling to follow him. Reason says this, even in our pain and brokenness. Hey, stop for a second. That doesn't make sense. Can't you see all the roadblocks? Analysis paralysis. Can't you see that you're half the person you used to be? You can't do this. So someone in pain is even lower than low, and they're thinking, you're right. So they're stuck. They never start something new. And I would say this, if you're starting something new, it might not be a gigantic business. There are still gigantic costs to starting a project, to starting a new habit, to starting a new thing that will benefit a community, something beyond who you are. If we only focus on who we are, okay, you're missing the precepts to discipleship. You're missing the benefits and rewards of good works to others. You're missing discipleship of being the hands and the feet of God with people.
Totally.
You're missing the bigger parts. But pain and fear try to keep you bound to the fact that you cannot do anything.
And there was those middle steps in your life, Gordon, between the time that you were bedridden and the time that you're here speaking in the podcast. Many years ago, you retooled, reformed the identity before starting business, before starting a platform. You really did think of what can I contribute?
Yes.
To the family? What can I do to bring life?
Right.
To 2 little boys and a wife. And so you had to redefine very humbly and very beautifully. You had to redefine what your version of success and work was.
Right.
But what if your work for the day, we're spending 6 trips going and taking the boys to school, picking them up and taking them to a game or whatever, and helping in that way. That was a huge, huge way until the vocational part picked up again in your life. You were able to take something and allow that change, that process to get you out of bed, and love carried you.
Right. The miracle for us was this, related to having a new identity and a new purpose for me. It was this. It was a feature of graduation. It was a feature of keeping my feet going, keeping my mindset going and having it renewed, understanding different things. So it might start with the kids, but the label was this. You're no longer the doctor, but you're the priest of the family.
I love it.
Okay.
And that was and it is so important.
Then I became the priest of the office. Prayer was more important than the sales tactics and marketing benefits.
Very much.
Okay. We saw miracles in our office over the years. We saw transactions happening, and we met contacts that the doors were open because God opened those.
Totally.
Okay. Then it moved into how can you help in the business on some practical ways? How many hours can you sit? Then it became, let's be involved philanthropically with ministries. Let's be involved in organizations. And Gordon, you can do that. You can help with that part.
You became the relationship bridge.
Then, Gordon, how can you become the COO of Selly Group Real Estate? Okay. Then, Gordon, what about Pilates? We're going to follow this door that God's opening. So we opened a Pilates business that worked well. And then the platform. And then this, what I'm explaining for people to give them hope, it might start at the lowest levels, but walk in those levels with high esteem and allow your identity to be fortified in Christ and allow that passion to burn in you, then you can share that with other people.
I love it.
Okay? If you just are doing a job search, okay, you're going to feel disqualified each time because of your chronic pain.
That is absolute gold.
Okay?
Somebody needs to hear that today.
Well, that's truth. And this commitment, and let's say you are trying a job search, that's great. The whole process starts with this. Are you going to make yourself vulnerable? Okay? Because that triggers that vulnerability in your life to get something new where someone's going to accept you in even your half-hearted abilities. It triggers our past weaknesses and our emotional traumas.
Can I ask you this? When you're saying about making yourself vulnerable, to who?
To the community in which you're trying to start your purpose, to the person who's interviewing you on a job, to someone that you might be getting a loan at the bank for to start a business, to every person you come in contact with. Do not walk in a false self. Be true to the identity that you have right now in Christ. Okay? You don't have to puff up anything. Don't allow fake knowledge to do a fake puff up in your life, because you will not succeed in growing in transformation.
That's so good, Gordon.
You have to grow in your purpose.
Yep.
Okay? And we know this investment that you're making in your vulnerability, okay, the disciple makes that same investment in their faith, and they fulfill the obligations to their devotion, which is their purpose in Christ. Okay, we had studied a little bit, we had mentioned a little bit about Luke chapter 14, and there was some deeply profound and seemingly, to me, unfair thoughts about humanity when Jesus was talking about hating your father and your mother and your brother and your sisters and yourself. And we talked about that was setting things aside.
Aramaic says that it's setting aside. It's not the definition of hatred as we say it.
God was, and there's another translation, God was rejecting the relational connections that would usurp the connection that you would have with him to become a disciple. I would say this. When God laid out those parameters, when Jesus laid out those parameters and said, hey, listen, is there a willingness to give up primary allegiance with your family and self for me? Okay? The same questions you have to ask yourself when you're trying to allow your identity to move into a purpose.
I love it.
Okay? Are you going to set a few things aside to do the purpose that, by the way, when you start proving the will of God and you're taking those footsteps in your purpose, you start to gain the vision of what you're supposed to do.
Because it's also not up to all those dearest people in your life, those family members, those people, that it's not up to them to find your purpose for you.
And you cannot be codependent upon them and borrow off their faith or finances.
That's right. And, I have to admit, on my end of this, there were times where I was trying to figure out your purpose.
You still do, Shreese.
Oh, come on. I mean, I gave it a break 5 minutes ago. Does that count? But, family members can't fix what is broken inside of you. And, setting those relationships aside so that your primary allegiance is with God does fuel the purpose.
Yes, it does.
Hugely. So I have to get out of the way myself.
Right. Very much so. The other thing is this. when you're stepping into this new purpose and you've dealt with chronic pain, I think one thing that's scary, and we've experienced this through different seasons, is you're going to bear a burden of public identification with Jesus. And we haven't reached the point of to death, but we've reached the point of this could be some destruction to our other businesses. This could be destruction to our lives. I don't want to experience the idea of destruction again because I already did when I lost my former career. And I've lost my former things. And I'm trying to start this new purpose in God. I don't want to feel this again. Those triggers happen, okay? And it's natural. And boy, the more vulnerable I am, the more people can take advantage of me. I don't want them to look at me as half-hearted or disabled or in any other condition that I can't do it or that I'll need extra help or extra services. I get that. I'm saying this. This is still part of the process, and it's natural to feel this. Don't be hard on yourself. For the couple that's in the room, we love you. Don't be too hard on yourself. These are the things that you might experience. But when you start with a strong foundation, and it's a step at a time, walking out your purpose. And sometimes you might have to write things on the mirror in your bathroom. This is my purpose. Don't stop. I'm a priest. I'm a business owner. I'm a father. I'm a mother. I'm a wife. I'm a husband. Get that identification renewed in every one of those categories. And when it comes to work, the fruit starts to be shown. It grows. But you have to be willing to put in that business type commitment of saying, hey, listen, there's an investment where I don't think I can even recover the means that have already been invested. Well, the good news is this. Those are God's means.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay? And we
I
can't.
love it.
How about the eternal reward on investment in heaven?
Huge.
Huge. God is asking this. Are you willing to walk into a new way of living that's kingdom living? I'm going to take those people that want to be healed. Let's move you into kingdom living. You and I are experiencing kingdom living right now, and we can share by our testimony, okay, the power of the blood of the Lamb and the practical, real parts of the kingdom of living. That's what's so beautiful about this message.
Totally.
And it's possible. But we can't focus on the potential losses or the extra time that we've put into something or the hours that we've put into being disciplined with our purpose where we felt like we're not seeing anything. Okay? So I want you to think about this because you mentioned this earlier. A big part of our platform and a big part of our lives, you've said, you always see me focusing on renewed thinking. Well, for the folks out there, continue to have that renewed thinking.
Very much. Because
you will grow accordingly, to the size of your renewed thinking. If your thinking remains small and fear is it's the walls of protection around your life, you're not going to grow. You're not going to grow in your purpose. Okay, maybe those were the harsh coach words, but that's true.
I think it's important to say, Gordon.
Right.
It is true.
Right. And sometimes Jesus Christ cannot be sampled out of curiosity. Sometimes there has to be a full commitment to what you're doing. So just be willing to do that. Now, let's talk about this. Have there been times where we felt like we were falling away from our own discipleship or our calling or our purpose?
Sure.
Absolutely.
I mean, we recently struggled with that.
Both of us have.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're talking to the folks in the living room right now. We would be remiss and inaccurate and give you false reportings to say that we haven't struggled with the same things that you might be struggling with right now. Okay? But what we discovered, where we get stuck, it's not from the external circumstances. it's primarily we get stuck with ourselves. Okay?
Yep.
And we get hooked by the world. We fall into line of what the world says conditional love is, or what is significant purpose. And then what we do is we deprave the deepest cravings that are in our hearts. We just say, okay, that's got to be fleeting. That can't be real. Here's what's real. We got to line it up with the world again. That's not kingdom living. Okay? That's taking a default measure on something that's less than what God has for you. Okay? You have a bigger purpose. So embrace that true self in your identification. Okay? Thomas Merton says that by social compulsions, compulsive is indeed the best adjective for the false self. It points to the need for ongoing and increasing affirmation. Well, we want to give your true self today, that couple that's in the living room. We want to share what the true self is and stay with that. Don't look for affirmation continually with what you're doing. Don't get it from your family. Don't get it from your relationships. Don't get it from anyone else. Give it to God at the cross. Set your anxieties down at the cross with Him. Move forward with your purpose in truth. You're not going to have to ask that question, who am I? When you're in the false self, you start asking that question again. Now, who am I again?
And you let everybody else define that, or
Absolutely.
Facebook or Instagram or whatever social media says for that day, whatever is popular at that moment.
Right.
Who am I or who am I not? And, it's a way of just continuous identity shattering.
Absolutely.
So that there's nothing stable to stand on in your mind.
Right.
And that is the opposite of living with your true self. Because your true self isn't defined by the amount of Facebook likes you have or the amount of people that understand even what your purpose may be. I mean, I think the heroes of the Bible, to me, were the ones who, I think of David himself in the Bible and his purpose. He was, Samuel went to anoint one of these boys in the household of Jesse as king. But the brothers that were inside of the house, Samuel, it was like, well, it's none of these guys. Do you have anybody else? The one who was truly called was out with the sheep.
Yes, he was.
He wasn't, he didn't look the part. His own family didn't believe in him.
Right. And the chronic pain people do not look the part.
They don't look the part.
They don't look the part.
And those parts in you might be shattered, but your true purpose is just beginning.
When I started, did I look the part?
No. You looked glassy. You were overweight. You were
thank you,
heavily
Sharice.
medicated. You were in bed. That's the
yes
truth.
or a yes or no response would have been sufficient.
Well, no, we can elaborate.
Okay.
And then you had huge weight gain because of, first of all,
medications,
and then food became a comfort source.
Okay. Do we have to dwell on this
Well,
right now,
I'm just
Sharice?
saying, did you look the part?
No.
Could you have talked about overcoming at that time in your life? And yet something was, and it was the Spirit of God working in you. Something was happening deep, deep, deep down. You were transforming. Your inner world was changing.
Yes, it was.
And I did believe that. I did believe it.
Well, it was happening.
So
as that was changing, I had to then step out with guideposts and messages and vision as we're speaking with those folks again in the living room. You might not look the part right now, but move forward. Go inwardly first and then move forward. You're going to see your purpose come about. Now, what's happened to me as we've walked out on the purpose? I look more fitting for the purpose now, don't I?
You do.
Okay.
But you never could do it keeps going back to this. You could never do the external change before God changed your internal world.
Yes.
Before you changed your mind.
Right. And the end of self is the beginning of God. We're out of time, Sharice. And we don't want to see people essentially fall away from discipleship or fall away from their purpose that God's got on their hearts. We want people to stay with it. So what final thoughts do you have right now to encourage others to keep going?
There is a cost to change, and it's the best price you will ever pay in your life. Don't stay stuck thinking that you cannot have any other option in this world than what you're doing right now. If what you're doing right now isn't working, there's a better thought. There's a better way. There's a renewing of your mind. And I would say if your old thinking is tired, be with God and have a different thought. He's going to transform you. Right. And this will allow space for your body to heal and for purpose to retool your life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. That's great. To piggyback off of what you're saying, when we're talking about defining the cost of commitment or the cost to our calling, and we feel like we've put in more money than we're seeing back, or we've put in more effort than what we're seeing as results, I'm going to encourage you on this. That investment that you're making right now, it does two things. It creates impact and influence. And in kingdom living, there's nothing more powerful with transformational change because of God's grace, with impact and influence. That defines it.
It's beautiful.
Better than anything else. Stick with it. You can do this. You can make these different changes. Okay? So that's the message for today.
It's a good one.
Why don't you follow up with how people can contact us and et cetera.
Find us on our website. It's spelled out, GordonandCharisse.com. Go to that website, and there are so many things that you can be a part of. We want you to be a part of our Better Living community on Facebook. It's a private, closed group, and that group is growing, and we want to continue to privately encourage people in that group. You can sign up for our newsletter. When you sign up, you're going to be also getting these podcast emails that will break down the podcast. It will give you like the relevant topics to the podcast. So I think it's great for you to know when a podcast is coming. You'll enjoy having that information.
Well, I'd like to interject on this.
Yes.
They are actually podcast highlights.
Yep.
And so they're also going to be on YouTube, and they're going to be on Spotify, and they're going to be on Facebook, and they're going to be on our website. And what it does is we break down the different topics of what we're doing. So if you don't want to listen to a 30-minute podcast, for instance, and you want to just grab 3 or 4 moments of inspiration, you can just
click on it.
Go to that section to get what you need for the day.
Absolutely.
Okay? We just want to keep engaging. We want to grow more intimately with our audience. And so in order to do that, please feel free to dialogue back to us, okay?
We need your input too.
We need you guys. We can't do this on our own.
And we're not doing this for ourselves. We're doing this for you, so your feedback is so important on what has spoken to you the most. What can we do to continue to encourage you?
Beautiful. Just beautiful.
Thank you so much for listening.
We love you guys, and we'll see you next week.
See you next week.